welcome back. Today we have a great treat for you, Michelle Hearn. She is a registered dietitian. She is an ultra runner, and she is now a double author. She is so great to hear from her perspective of leaving kind of the traditional roles in dietetics, and she's forging her own path. Welcome, Michelle.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back on. I'm excited to catch up.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Go back and watch our first video from a couple of years ago, and she was fresh on the scene. And now she's been on even Mike Mutzel and so many, Dr. Barry. She's been on so many amazing podcasts and videos. So definitely follow her. And it's Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat on Instagram, right?
Yes, correct.
And so tell us a little bit about your story. You know, if some people are not familiar with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, briefly, my health journey really began when I was 12. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I was 5 feet tall, 57.5 pounds, so incredibly underweight. I ended up going into inpatient treatment for 2 months. I was immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system and fed the standard American diet. And back then, tube feeding ingredients, the number one ingredients in tube feeding formulas were corn syrup, maltodextrin, canola oil, soy protein. Fast forward to today, they're pretty much the same thing. We're talking 28 years later. And, I was told, even as, a 12-year-old, like, first of all, I was given a very slim chance of survival. I already had my kidney shutting down, heart going into heart failure. But, I was basically told, like, hey, if you do survive this eating disorder, people don't recover from eating disorder. You're going to have to deal with this your whole life. And I became weight restored. But that advice from the doctor was true. I struggled with racing thoughts around food, periods of severe anxiety and depression, relapsed, lost quite a bit of weight when I was in high school and again in college. And I thought, like, this is my lot in life. I'm just going to have to be a high functioning person with an eating disorder. I became healthy enough to participate in athletics. I ended up becoming an athlete, a long distance runner, went and ran in high school and college. Unfortunately, my college career ended. I had a really bad stress fracture from low bone density. But I wanted to become a dietitian. Like, I knew food was powerful and I wanted to understand. I think a lot of people kind of pick their career or maybe their life direction, like, what am I missing? Is there a way of eating that can help with my anxiety or help with my depression? I've many people with eating disorders and with anxiety. It felt like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. Like, everyone around me is participating, having fun, and I'm constantly worried. What am I going to eat? Did I eat too much? Did I not eat enough? Like, constant racing thoughts, right? And I became a dietitian. And I said before that as I went through the internship, a lot of things didn't make sense. Like, for example, we'd go into the room as someone with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor would say, hey, we're going to teach this person to eat 75 grams of carbs at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then we'll teach them how to dose themselves with insulin. And so I would just ask questions like, wait, should we maybe teach them to eat less carbohydrates since their body is no longer tolerating carbohydrates? And I was kind of pegged as this, like, difficult dietetic statement right away. And I remember going into, the ICU and looking at the tube feeding ingredients. I'm like, oh my God, this is the same stuff I was fed as a 12-year-old. And at that point, I'm 24. I just turned 40. And it's the same. I mean, are there better tube feeding formulas? Absolutely. Are they covered by insurance? Never. So unless a family wants to spend on average about $1,200 a day to feed somebody, then they're going to get the default formula, which is, maltodextrin, corn syrup, canola oil, and a bunch of garbage. So yeah, I really, when I became a dietitian, and you're young, you're a student, I'm like, okay, maybe I don't understand. So I was just constantly told it's calories in, calories out. It's the food pyramid. It doesn't matter if you're underweight, overweight, kidney failure, diabetes. Carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. And as I practiced, I saw so many people not only not heal, but get worse. We'd have someone come in with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes and then amputations and infections and constantly, and everyone in the medical profession, I've said this before, I really believe goes in with good intentions and they care and they want to do good work. But over time, it just kind of starts to beat you down because you just see so much disease and so much, death. Yeah. And so it was really hard. But it was in 2019 that I kind of had my big switch. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. At that time was a marathon runner. And it just felt like all of a sudden my health fell off a cliff. I went from being able to run easily 10 to 15 miles, and I'd go out for a 2 or 3 mile run, and I was breaking out in cold sweats. I remember driving to work and I had to pull over because I was sweating and I couldn't see. And so of course you go to your doctor, you go call your dietitian friends, like, what am I doing wrong? What's going on? Had all these lab works done and everything was normal. And of course, traditional dietitians told me, like, you're not eating enough. You need more calories. You need more carbs. And I was like, are you sure? Because at that time I was eating 400 grams of carbohydrates. That's a lot. I'm not a large human. And so, of course, I was like, all right, I guess I'll eat more carbs. And as you can imagine, that didn't end well. In my kind of come to Jesus moment, at this point, I was working at a hospital in Portland, Oregon. I floated, so I covered different floors. I was covering oncology during this time. And so we had a young patient pass, which is always hard. So I came home early and my body was achy and it hurt. So I went to lie down on the couch and I fell asleep. I woke up and it was like 2 a.m. and it just felt like my body was on fire. Like my joints hurt, my head hurt. And I think a lot of people that have health struggles kind of come to this point where you're like, I am out of ideas. I have done everything that the medical community told me to do. I've rested, I've changed how I ate. I've at that point taken, ibuprofen, tried other things, weed, alcohol, whatever. And nothing was helping. So I remember just sitting in my kitchen being like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. And finally, after about 5 minutes of feeling sorry for myself, I grabbed my car keys and drove to 7-Eleven and got like 30 pounds of ice, came home, put it in the bathtub and just sitting in an ice bath, like bawling. And my wife, woke up and she came in and said, hey, you know what? I think it's time to do something different. And I knew what she meant by that, she's wonderful and has supported me through so much, but it was time to quit running. I was 37 at the time, or 36. And I was like, you know what? I'm too old to try to be qualifying for the marathon or whatever. And so, yeah, it's interesting because certainly at that moment, I'm bawling in a bathtub of ice. I didn't think like, wow, my life is about to change for the better. And so, yeah, the next day I just, was like, well, if I'm not eating so many carbs or I'm not running, why don't I reduce my carbohydrates? And so that's kind of what led to this. It ended up, I decided to research keto diets and carnivore diets, and my health improved so much that, I literally changed everything about my life.
And then you got healthy enough and you started running again, right?
Yes, it's funny. I hadn't really intended to run. Like I've been running since I was 14 at that point. And so I felt like, I just almost like lost a part of my identity, but I was so focused on like, all right, I just wanted to feel better. Everything hurt. And so after several weeks at that time, I was doing almost full carnivore diet, just very high meat, high fat. I did drink coffee, but 0 carb. And, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. I always tell people, like, make sure you take electrolytes. I had gnarly headaches that first couple of weeks, but my lifelong anxiety started to fade. Like I started to enjoy work. I started to not feel anxious. I started to sleep better. My pain went away, but I kind of attributed that, well, I'm not running. And there were a few pivotal things that happened that made me like think like, holy cow, something big is happening. The first one was I was at a work meeting and my dietitian coworker next to me was getting kind of fidgety and she was like, I got to get a snack. Do you need a snack? And I was like, hey, we're going to eat at like noon. I'm like, I'm fine. And she goes, Michelle, it's 2. So at that point I'd gone probably like 5 or 6 hours without eating. And so a lot of us in the low carb world, that's just of course we do that. But up to that point in my life, if I didn't eat every 2 to 3 hours, I would get like dizzy and shaky. I was constantly on this blood sugar roller coaster, And so I remember thinking like, wow, I wasn't hungry. Like I was able to focus and I wasn't distracted. And then about 3 weeks into eating the really low carbohydrate diet, so my wife actually, I came home, she beat me home. She normally doesn't, from work. And she asked me to come sit with her. It's like, yeah, what's going on? And she said, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, you know, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And that was when we were both like, holy crap. Yeah. And then it was almost just kind of a mishap. Like I was around more, I used to be gone for hours at a time on the weekends and during the week training, running. And my wife kind of jokingly said, like, you're annoying me. Like, you should go for a run. And I was like, oh, I don't think I can run on this low carbohydrate diet. But I kind of had a moment of like, you know what? It's good for you. It's good to get fresh air, like drop the ego. And I ended up going for an hour run and I felt fine. And that's when like, the wheels start turning in your head and you're like, oh, and my poor wife, she's like, oh, you can be a recreational runner. This will be great. You can run a few miles a day. We'll go to trails. And I was like, what if I run ultras instead of this like 26 miles? How about I run more than 26 miles? So yeah, since the last time that we spoke, I've run a 6-hour race. I've run 3 50-mile races and a 100-kilometer race, so 62 miles. Yeah, and I've placed really well in all of them. I've won several of them.
Wow.
And yeah, my body feels great. So it's been just an honor. Like I said, everything in my life has become so much better since I've changed how I ate.
And what was kind of the moment that you decided you need to kind of change a little bit your career path?
Yeah. Interestingly, like when my health got so much better in that a relatively short period of time. I was working in acute care. Like I said, in Portland, Oregon. I kind of naively thought like, wow, I'm feeling so much better. I want to learn more about this. And as I,
you want to share?
yeah, like it's exactly, of course, everyone's going to want to know this, right? Well, because, my wife and I both work at, institutions, you have access to all clinical trials. Sometimes if you don't, you might be able to get the abstract, but you can't get the whole document. And so I'm going through all these documents, reading the work of Eric Westman and Jeff Bullock and Dr. Finney. And I'm like, holy cow, we have so much evidence that low carbohydrate diets can reverse type 2 diabetes. I had patients that were diabetic for 30 years. And I'm reading a study that they were able to get somebody off 150 units of insulin in 14 days.
Yeah.
Like, it blew my mind. And so, of course, I put together this whole presentation, took it to our clinical director, said, I want to do this. I want to talk about this. I can help people. And it was just like, no, you have to teach the nutrition guidelines, the end. And so I really struggled with that. I thought like, well, surely if, try to take it higher, if I try to talk to more people. But it seemed like the more people I talked to, the more people were just like, what's wrong? Like, why don't you just talk about the nutrition guidelines? You're making a paycheck. Things are fine. Like it really seemed that as long as we were checking boxes, that was what I was there to do. And, so I decided during that period, that's when I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to write a book. I'm going to dig into all the research and I'm going to write about what a low carbohydrate diet can do for where the research is at. I think we have some good data on like, cancer and oncology, but that wasn't where my expertise was. So I wrote about eating disorders. Now, years later, Dr. Norwitz and I have now published a study, a case study on anorexia and animal-based diets, people going into remission. But yeah, the book on mental disorders, eating disorders, sarcopenia. But while I'm in the clinical setting, like kind of losing my mind, that's when COVID hit. And so all of a sudden I was a newer dietitian. They told me like, hey, we don't have hours. We don't have elective surgery, but don't worry. We're going to move you to the call center. And I'm like, what do you mean? What does that mean? They said, well, as opposed to practicing as a dietitian, you're just going to take orders for food. You're not allowed to say anything. And so I did that for maybe a month. I would have type 2 diabetics call in and be like, I want the chocolate cake and the hamburger. And I was like, I can't do this. And I was in trouble several times because I would give advice and you're not allowed to do that. People would say, well, what should I eat? I was like, oh, I'd fast. Like, this is not good for you, And then thankfully, and I have people reach out to me all the time. Like, oh my gosh, I now that I know, I ethically don't feel like I can practice. And it becomes, kind of like my book title, the Dietitian's Dilemma. What do I do? And so I feel very fortunate that, my wife and I looked at our finances and it was like, when can you leave? Like, when are we going to be able for me to transition out of that? Knowing that whatever else I was able to do, I was not going to make very much money. And that was within a couple months. So, I had a couple months where I didn't work. I just worked on the book. And then I just kind of hustled. I worked at a, sausage making place, kind of got my hands dirty working in meat. And I've done a few different things between now and then. And now I'm really fortunate. I actually get to do a little bit of dietetics work, specifically in low carbohydrate nutrition. And of course, now we've got the kids' book out too. So I'm doing my best to promote that.
So, that's so great that you can work more in line with what your values, I don't think you can do that very long. Because you'll get sick again. If you work in a place that doesn't align with what you really believe in, you can't, your body will just, I had that where my body like freaked out when I was trying to do like a desk job. And it was just like, I was like getting heartburn and everything, like everything was falling apart when I was trying to do a job that wasn't really in my interest. So what calls you about children? Like, why did you want to help children with your new book?
Yeah, and just real quick, Michaela Peterson, her father, Jordan Peterson, has written, a few fantastic books. And one thing that really stuck out, his 12 rules to life, that I think about and I reflect on a lot, is do not do what you hate. And he defines hate not as like, things make you struggle with, like, I don't want to work out, but no, it's like what genuinely goes against my soul as a human. And that's exactly like you were saying, like, you can almost feel that, like, your heart being ripped. But yeah, no, let's talk about kids' books. So what the inspiration behind this is, usually when I wake up in the morning, I'll get some coffee and I'll kind of flip through some of the news, specifically looking at more, nutritional news. And I saw that the FDA had just released 2 medications for children with type 2 diabetes. So, so when I was a young human, type 2 diabetes, it wasn't even called type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes because we often only saw it when people were, and not even 18 plus, it was when we saw it in their 40s, 50s, 60s. But we can no longer call it adult onset because so many children have type 2 diabetes. They no longer they have elevated blood glucose, which is extremely dangerous. I think in the medical community, I don't think we give enough credence to just how dangerous high blood sugar over time is. I mean, not only does it damage, it damages everything. It damages all your arteries. Type 2 diabetics have a 2 to 4-fold risk of heart disease. You're going to lose limbs, your eyes, your kidneys. But anyway, so I'm reading this and I just am like livid. My wife and I, we don't have children, but we both have, siblings, and I've got lots of nieces and nephews. And my youngest nephew, just turned 1. And my sister's kids, I just got to spend some time with, are 16 months and 4, and just wonderful. We're playing with them. Kids are supposed to have vibrant, beautiful, fun lives. They're not supposed to be ravaged by disease. And I also genuinely believe that a lot of the processed food companies target not only children, but people potentially struggling with income and a lower socioeconomic status. And it just makes me so mad. And I feel like we have this problem, type 2 diabetes is increasing in children. Well, it's increasing in everybody, but it is exponentially increasing in children and teenagers. And so to see the FDA say, hey, we have this problem, let's create another problem, in my opinion, because you're not addressing the root cause. I was livid. I was on a run and I just like, I have to do something. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write another book. And I was like, it's going to be about children who get type 2 diabetes. And as I'm running, I'm like, that sounds really boring. Who's going to want to read that? And then in our town, they were having an election. And one of the women running for mayor, her name is Sarah Fox. And she had this billboard, this picture of a fox. And I'm like, oh, that's cute, foxes. And I just started thinking of words that start with F. I was like, foxibetes and the fox spittle. And I was like, hey, all right. And so yeah, I went to Starbucks later that day and just started outlining like, how can I trying to encompass, what companies like Pixar and Disney do. Let's do a fun story with gorgeous images, but let's have a really powerful message so that kids get it and it's an adventure and they're like, hooray. But parents watch it and go, "Ooh, we got to change, or we got to do something." And so, yeah, the Fox family food fight was born out of that. And I was very fortunate to actually get some funding for it. I was a little naive about how much illustration from the wrong business would cost to do for a kid's book. And I knew, I was like, oh, this has to be color and fully illustrated and all that. So we're super proud of it, and I'm really excited too that going to be able to donate, a third of all the profits to my charity, the Protein Project, which just, we source meats from a local farmer. His name's Will. They do regenerative agriculture, and he sells me the cuts of meat kind of packaged, kind of like imperfect produce, to where you may not be able to sell it, but there's nothing wrong with it, And so I get grass-fed meat for about $1.99 a pound.
Wow.
So we're able to, yeah, right. So we're able to purchase that, and then it goes to a food pantry in my community called The Fish. And it's interesting, when I first went to talk to the food pantry to see like, hey, is this something you'd be interested in, getting meats? I was kind of taken back by how many people were in line for food. I mean, it was like a Tuesday, and I'm like, this is my community. This is 3 miles away from where I live. And, talking to people, as the price of food has gone up, as the price of rent has gone up, people are struggling just with basic food. And, unfortunately, when you go to food pantry, what is most of the stuff they have? Beans, rice, cereal. I was like, we need to get people meat. And so, yeah, and they tell me that it just goes so fast. Like we dropped 300 pounds of meat last Monday, and they sent me an email on Thursday and said it's gone, like within days. And they even they say we have to limit it to like, 2 pounds a family. But it's one of those things that I think is really valuable.
They cook it, or they just give it to people?
They give it to people. So it comes frozen, and then they have like a freezer. And it's funny because their freezer is super small. Because when I first went to visit the place, they're like, oh, we can't give frozen foods anymore. We just don't get any frozen donations. And so when we were looking at it, I was like, are you guys okay with like pulling, because they had a walk-in freezer, like pulling from your freezer to put that in as people come through. And they're like, oh yeah, that's no problem. And so they say it's always like a workout, because they'll do like 20 or so pounds and put it in, and then people take it right away. So somebody's always running back and forth to restock it. In my perfect world, that's what we would do, way more of that, right? Like, and obviously, I'm not anti-carb. I certainly use carbs to fuel my activity. I think a lot of metabolically healthy people can handle carbs. The problem is when we funnel, tons of carbohydrates into metabolically unhealthy people, and specifically, those more processed carbohydrates.
And I mean, also, it's like you said, when you have less money, all you have access to is macaroni and cheese, or, I mean, and I see it all the time, like poor kids with their teeth all rotted out and everything. It's like, at the playground or something, you just see that, especially kids that are immigrants or something, that their teeth are all rotted out. And it's like, why is that? It's not like, and I mean, I see it now. I have a 3-year-old. I don't know if I had a kid last time we talked, but he, you see that the access to sugar and just trying to limit him eating sugar is so difficult. I mean, and I try to fill him up on meats and eggs and everything. And then, then maybe he can have some carbs or fruit or whatever. And then, but just reading the labels, and it's a lot of work, and I'm very educated on this topic. And, if people think juice is healthy, or if he doesn't drink juice, he drinks electrolytes, he drinks raw milk and electrolytes. That's all he drinks. And he doesn't know about juice. I mean, of course he's had a juice box from, a soccer game or something, but I don't keep that at home. And yeah, just limiting the sugar is so hard when you have a kid it's still, I'm in control of his food, but like if he starts getting older and goes to sleepovers or goes to birthday parties and things. I mean, I can't even imagine, like, yeah. So I
Yeah.
think what you're doing is so important with the book, because I mean, it really has to come from them. Like, I mean, his tastes are like, he wants every day I cook him eggs, and he does not want, like, I'll boil him an egg sometimes and it's cold, and he's like, I want a hot scrambled egg with butter and salt and cheese
Yeah.
top. And he's like, he knows what's good food, you know? And so I hope that by feeding him that way from the get-go, that, you know, it sticks with him, like, knowing this is what real food is. And then the rest of it's just like extra or junk or, or, you know.
Yeah, that's why I think that's ideal, right? Is we're starting young. You know, I actually was really excited. I had somebody reach out to me. In the back of the book, it has Freddie's favorite foods list for, you know, the fox. And they said, yeah, my kid went through, we read it. And, you know, Freddie's favorite food, it says like eggs. And, you know, his son will be like, well, I like eggs, or butter. Well, I like butter. You know, we want to, the purpose of the book, and it's not like a keto book or a carnivore book, was to show just how powerful processed foods are, you know, and how they basically kind of come in and promise like, oh, you're going to feel great. They're going to taste great. Everything's great. And, you know, they do, they're almost to many people very addicting. Like it's hard to stop eating them. And before you know it, you're very sick. And you're like, well, wait a second. I was watching this commercial with this cartoon character and everything seemed fun and fine. But like you said, it's really hard because everywhere you go, our modern food environment, it is astronomical. Like you literally can't go anywhere. I can't even check the news on my phone without getting an ad for processed food. So it's very, very difficult. And so, you know, I have parents reach out to me sometimes, and, you know, I'm certainly not a parent, so my non-existent children are perfect, right? But I think you're doing the right thing. I think the best we can do for our kids and for anybody else is trying to make meals protein centric. You know, let's start there. Let's get the good protein, because that's going to have, you know, all the amino acids. That's going to have a lot of essential fatty acids. And those are the things, you know, when we're talking about bone health and teeth, you know, it was really interesting. I was very fortunate to go to Kenya in 2004. I've actually been twice. And, you know, they follow a relatively high carbohydrate diet, but, you know, they grow all their food. They milk the cow, they eat eggs. And it was interesting when I went back in 2013, a lot of the more rural areas had shifted to more processed, you know, and the amount of rotting teeth and things that I saw. And the more I've kind of studied this, you know, obviously reviewed some of the works of like Weston Price, is I don't believe people are like, oh, you eat any sugar, it's going to rot your teeth. I don't believe that's necessarily true. But what happens is when we stop getting the vitamin K, vitamin D, you know, all those bone building vitamins, then we start having problems. You know, people that tend to be eating a lot of sugar and carbs, they're not necessarily, it's not like, oh, I had a piece of sourdough bread at night, or, oh, I had, I don't know, even something more processed. It's like, I'm eating processed food all the time. And on top of that, I'm not getting the meats, the fats, and those other things. And so, you know, and I can't tell you, like you said, with juice, like the facility that I'm working at, that was the first thing that we changed. I can't believe it. 28 people going through 300 ounces of juice a week. I was like, what is going on? Right. Well, we're going to ask that right away. Yeah, soda. It is, I can't, you know, it is amazing to me how many people still drink soda. You know, even people that I like care about, friends and family. It's like, that is one of the worst things you can do for your health. So yeah, it's tough. I feel like you almost have to be so different in this world. You have to be that person that's like, yeah, you know what, I'm actually going to eat the meat. Yeah, you know what, I'm not going to have a piece of cake. Yeah, I know it's kind of weird, but it's not child abuse to tell my kid not to have the Capri Sun, you know? So it's strange.
I learned there's actually Capri Sun makes like this water stuff, and it's actually, I mean, it doesn't have crazy stuff in it. It only has like 1 carb or something. And I was like, glad to see, because it's like, when you're a kid, you feel left out. Like, oh, I want because I always wanted that. And my parents would never buy that, you know, but I found that they make like a flavored water, but it's just like almost, I don't know, but it doesn't even have sucralose. It has stevia, I think.
Okay.
So I bought that for like the soccer snack or whatever. And I was like, yes, they have something that's not
nice.
like horrible. it's called like Raging Waters or Roaring Waters or something, but it's still a Capri Sun looking, it is Capri Sun
Yeah, yeah.
brand or whatever. So, I mean, I think there isn't some things that are healthier, like I'll get them those smart sweets. I mean, I know they still like spike your blood sugar or whatever, but they feel like they're a little better than gummy bears or smart sweets. Is that what they are? And I mean,
I don't know. And I think, once again, I don't think it has to be all or nothing too, right? Especially for our kids, especially for kids that are more active. Um, but yeah, once again, going back to like, are we protein centric? My nephew, he's now 13. He's a type 1 diabetic, and he was diagnosed at 4. And so, especially when either my wife and I, or sometimes my sisters and I would be watching him, we have the app on our phone, so he has a pump, we can see his blood sugar. And it was always so interesting to watch, when he'd have something really high, like his blood sugar would go really high. But he's also very active. Like, he's a soccer player and, wants to be a competitive soccer player. But instead of doing Gatorade, they now do, I think it's called like IV hydration. And, it's much lower carb, like 15 grams versus, 40 grams or whatever. And he's very aware. He knows, Aunt Michelle, when I'm done running or done working out, he has protein shakes, or he has, if he's going to eat carbohydrates, he makes sure he has some protein with it. Because not only can he can feel it, he feels better, but he can literally see it in real time, like what that's doing with his blood sugar. So
that'd be great if they gave that to everyone, like a blood sugar meter, like I think everyone needs to see that. But how do they even know kids have type 2 diabetes? Like, because I know they don't. I mean, I've never seen him take my son's blood sugar at the doctor or anything.
I think unfortunately how it goes is, at least when the youngest person I saw with type 2 diabetes was 8. And they tend to come in with like those symptoms, like, hey, he's really dizzy. He doesn't feel really good. Like, his blood sugar is so high that he's like shaky. He's having to urinate a lot. They tend to be already obese. Just almost, they feel like it's a massive flu. Like, he's just not getting over this, but he's not running fever. That's kind of what led the one child that I saw that was 8. So yeah, just basically feeling awful. And they've tried a bunch of things. And often the doctor is at least relatively aware, like, things have been progressing pretty poorly. Often it's not like the first time, they've seen a kid or seen a child. So
isn't it type 1 diabetes getting more common too in younger people?
it is. And I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, I'm sure I could give you a bunch of theories to, we're a less healthy society. But yeah, we're seeing it in younger people, and also a little bit later on in life, like people even, in their late teens or early 20s, that are having type 1 as well.
Wow. So, what did you think about these headlines that were coming out about people taking sugar money from the sugar industry, dietitians?
Oh my goodness. It's so sad, but it's not surprising. Like, I feel like I don't think there's anything you could tell me about the American I guess Academy of Nutrition, they used to be called the American Dietetics Association, that would surprise me. Because even when I was like a new dietitian in 2009, they were heavily sponsored. Like, the number one sponsors were Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and even then, when I was still, a relatively high carbohydrate person and practicing, prescribing the nutrition guidelines, I even said, this feels like a conflict of interest. And now, even before that news came out that, dietitians were literally getting paid by the sugar industry, there was a whole article in the New York Times that the Academy of Nutrition was using the money from dietitians, because you have to pay, for your membership, to invest in stock of Coca-Cola.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, holy crap. And it is, I mean, they make us do every year this stupid ethical training to maintain your RD. And one of the things that you have to do is, if you are ever sponsored by anything, you are supposed to put a disclaimer, like, this message is by this. So when they send out some continuing education courses, they'll say, this person, like, you have to say, I have this conflict of interest, like, I work for this company. So all the dietitians that were sponsored by the sugar industry, at least to my knowledge, that recently, were doing all these posts and kind of got busted, they didn't have any disclaimers. They weren't saying, like, they were saying, this is my view, this is what I believe as a dietitian, like, and that's fine. I mean, they're obviously total bozos, You can say that if you want, but you have to say, and this is being funded by X, and they weren't doing that. So,
I mean,
to me, they
even
should be stripped of their ID, but
but if the body that governs them is the one telling them to do the bad thing, then, it's like they're getting sponsored by like, I loved your video about the tobacco at the end.
Yeah,
You were like, yeah,
exactly.
cigarettes stop cravings for sugar. It's like,
I mean, is that next? I feel like that's where we're at, right? Like, nothing would surprise me. And that's why I don't think we're ever going to see a change from like the Academy of Nutrition, right? Because they are making so much money. Just like the nutrition guidelines. I went to a policy meeting this past June in Washington, D.C., and met with some brilliant humans, people from Nina Teichel's group. Dr. Bullock was there, Dr. Finney was there. And we wrote this amazing proposal because we want to get a low carb option added to the nutrition guidelines in 2030. Oh, wow. And we had all this data and all this science. I mean, this whole process, the meeting was only a few days, but the writing process took months, and it was rejected. They said, there's no evidence, meat causes heart disease. And then you find out the people on the board are sponsored, they work for Kraft and they work for Carnivore. And so it's like, oh, it just feels like you're fighting this losing battle. Really, really frustrating.
But I think, people like you and the grassroots of Instagram and YouTube and everything. I mean, I think we are getting the message out there. We might not be changing, but it's like changing from the bottom up, like individual people are now in control of the narrative and of we can research ourselves, we don't have to just wait for, the school cafeteria to give us a piece of pizza and some corn, like that's what I grew up on.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you nailed it. And I think that's where change is going to come from. Change is going to be grassroots, and it can be really hard. It can be really frustrating. Like, because, like I said, you feel like you do all this work and then you're like, am I actually making a difference? Am I really doing anything? I remember reaching out to a friend recently and I was like, man, I feel like I'm doing all this advocacy and, does it matter? And she said something I'll never forget. And she said, Michelle, that's all that matters. And I thought about that a lot. And like you just, just like you put it, it's the ripple effect, right? Because when I share my story, maybe somebody else hears it and they're like, gosh, I relate to that. I used to struggle with anxiety or an eating disorder, or I think dietitians are stupid too, And so they start like listening and learning, and they become better. And when they become better, our health doesn't just impact us. I mean, I think that's something that as a society, we should embrace a little bit more, because when I'm healthier, my family's healthier, everybody around me is healthier. I remember once I got a message, and I printed it out. I'll always keep it for when I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Somebody said, I was in a position, I was been depressed for decades, dealing with severe depression, and I had made a plan to take my life. And I was talking with a friend, and they had your book, and they gave it to me, and I read it. And she said, because I read it, she said, I ended up getting help. And so like that changed her life. And so, I mean, I was crying when I was reading this email. So everybody, all of our stories matter. All of our testimonies matter. The right information has the power to change your life. And it's not overly complicated. We've taken based in human physiology and what foods we're supposed to eat and how we're supposed to get some sun and do some movement. And we've made it like seem unattainable for most people. And it's the opposite. It's really easily attainable. It just takes some work.
It's so amazing. Yeah. I mean, like my aunt lost a bunch of weight doing keto, and my dad lost a bunch of weight doing carnivore, and my sister does, very low carb diet. And, so it is, we all affect, and my husband does low carb diet, and, none of them would do that if they didn't know me, I don't think so. It would be just
Absolutely.
Follow the regular, whatever their doctor says, it's like, oh, well, you're 250 pounds. Well, that's fine. No big deal. Like they don't even
let me put you on a statin and call it good.
I think now their doctors are so afraid to even say that people are overweight. What do you think about that?
Oh God, we could do a whole episode on this, because I have very strong opinions about this. Obese is the clinical term, and we have become so afraid of offending people that we have put their feelings above facts. We put their feelings above actual health. I always say when I was 5 feet tall and 57 pounds, people weren't afraid to say, you are going to die. You are frighteningly underweight. They didn't say, you're a shitty person, get your shit together. It's not a moral judgment. It's saying, this is a problem and we have to make a change. And obviously at that point in my life, it was like, wow, we have to do a major change or you literally will die. And for some people who are potentially overweight or obese, it may not be that acute. But I think if we treated it like that and said, look, this is going to end poorly. You are overweight. You have too much body fat. And, Dr. Lyons just recently, written an amazing book, Forever Strong, where she talks about like, we've got to get people to more muscle. We're so focused too on, you're too fat, you have too much fat. Let's keep people stronger. And then the fat loss kind of follows, once you eat enough protein and do some resistance training. And so maybe we need to word that conversation a little differently, but I hate how afraid we are to have like real conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, even I got disappointed because my husband, I went to the doctor and with him because I didn't think she would say the right thing. And of course, she looked at his lab work and all this stuff, and she's like, oh, it's all fine, but I'm like, he needs, he's like 40 pounds, 50 pounds overweight. And just like, you need to like say something, please say something because he's not listening to me, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, great. She's not going to say anything because she doesn't want him to get offended. So.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily super popular where I work. I'm not trying to be people's best friend or, I want people to heal. Like I'd rather you hate me, but we get better. But I'm going to have honest conversations. And, that was hard in the clinical setting. I've shared before that I walked into a room. This is when I worked in the acute care. And a woman, like I literally walked in there and introduced myself as the dietitian. And the first thing this woman said to me was, well, I'd rather die than give up cake. And all I said was, well, you're on your way. And I was suspended for several days because she was so offended and her nurse called my boss. But I mean, I even tried, I showed, I was like, look at her labs. Like, these are horrible. Her BUN is off the chart. Like, and I'm like, now you made her sad. It's like that whole coddling that we do now. It's really, once again, we could do a whole, probably a few hours on that. And it's not in, trying to be mean or whatever. It's just being honest. And I think we really impede people from healing and moving forward when we're not honest with them and ourselves. Yeah. And once again, it is, if anything, it's not a moral judgment ever. 99.9% of the time, it's the system. The system sucks. It has really set a lot of people up to fail. It is not the patient or the person's fault. But we do have to at least say like, okay, this is where we're at. So we can actually do something about it.
But you have to work in a place where they'll have your back, too. Like, I mean,
yes.
You can't like mouth off to people, but if you tell them just the facts, like, it's not healthy to be, to have a abdominal, whatever, the waist measurement or something. I mean, it's supposed to be this and yours is this. I mean, that's a fact. I'm not just saying you're ugly or something,
Yeah, well, the Academy of Nutrition, I'm supposed to tell people that it's okay to drink Coca-Cola as long as they do it in moderation. And I just refuse to say that because I don't believe it's true. I think the science says it's not true. But
when you get a Coca-Cola, for example, like, even the ones in the glass bottle, like they taste good. Like, don't get me wrong. Like one of the old fashioned ones, like, you take one sip and it reminds me of childhood, of like, especially like if you had a tummy ache or something, somebody might say, well, drink that or whatever. But then how can, like, I could just guzzle like a 2-liter, like how you can't stop. Like, I don't understand. It's not like a moderation food. That's what I don't understand. Like I always thought there was something wrong with me because I couldn't moderate like sugary cereals. I couldn't moderate Coke. I couldn't moderate anything and I thought I have something wrong with me. And it was great to find like the low carb community and be like, oh, it's not you. These are drug like foods, I was like, oh, okay. It's not just
Yeah.
that I'm supposed to be able to take one bite of Pringles, for example, something like
And a
that.
lot of people can't, there's very good data that, well, we know that food scientists have created, foods, we'll use that in quotes, that they are able to light up certain centers of your brain that literally prevent you from stopping consuming them. It's very similar to the action of, illicit substances. They even shift neurotransmitters, glutamate and GABA. I'm actually going to be on a policy that we're trying to get food addiction added to the DSM-5. I think that will really help having it recognized as an actual issue problem, maybe even in some policy change. But, we'll see. My expectations are always a little bit like, you're hopeful, but, yeah, no, what you said, it's moderation for most people, more people, at least the people that I see in my practice. And I've seen thousands of people, over the 15 years I've done this, they can't moderate, and it's not their fault. And if they are able to transition to just a whole foods, diet where they're prioritizing protein and mostly protein and fat, their life is great. And then you have all these dumb dietitians and food companies telling you like, oh, there's something wrong with you if you can't eat processed foods. It's just like, can you imagine telling an alcoholic, like, hey, if you can't have one shot, there's something wrong with you. Like, nobody would do that. You'd be called a terrible person. But because there's just so much bad information out there, and sugar and processed foods are so ubiquitous, and there's astronomical amounts of money in it, more than any other. I mean, it probably rivals the pharmaceutical industry. So we have to just be aware and and try to spread the word that, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a really messed up system.
But I think, the work you're doing is so amazing. You're spreading the word that real food is always the place to start, and protein, and show us a couple of pages of your book. Show us what it looks like.
Oh yeah, thank you. So you can see this is the cover, the Fox Family Food Fight. So kind of the premise of the book, you can see this. I'm going to show. So this is kind of the processed food industry guy. His name is Foolery. So he is a fox, and he is like super buff, and he tells the Fox family, like, why are you hunting, fishing, and foraging? Come to the city, work in my Feel Good Foods factory. He owns the Feel Good Foods factory, where he's like, if you eat all these foods, you'll be buff like me. And what do you know? They go to the Feel Good Foods factory and they work, and they feel awful. Like, Papa's hands are achy, Mama's, feeling fatigued. But little Freddie Fox ends up getting type 2 fox diabetes, and he ends up in the foxpital. So
oh my goodness.
Here he is in the foxpital. And so he ends up seeing the foxitician. And what do you know, her advice isn't super helpful. Like she tells him, like, hey, just keep eating the Feel Good Foods. We're just going to dose you with medication 3 times a day. And it's basically Grandpa Frankie who's like, this is ridiculous. So they kind of decided as a family, like, hey, we're going to go back, to eating our, primal diet to see if that helps. But then they get really frustrated because they're like, well, how come this Foolery guy, how come he's so healthy if he's eating all these processed foods? And then it kind of clicked, like, we've never actually seen him eat any of this food. And so, not to like totally spoiler alert, but they follow him back to his den, and he is not eating the Feel Good Foods. He's got a farm. He is eating farm fresh foods, gosh darn it, and lifting weights. And so that's little Freddie. It's like, he's crying. That's his kind of first thing, is like, oh my gosh, this person is taking advantage of us, lying to us just for profit. But so, the Fox family kind of decides, like, all right, we're going to spread the word. We're going to, type of thing. So that's kind of the premise of the book, but it's fun. Like I said, it's full color, and, it's got a good message.
That's great. I'll have to get that for Noah for the holidays. So
I appreciate that.
How can they get that? How can people get it?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon. So we've got I highly recommend, just because, once again, it's fun, it's full color, getting the one you can actually hold. But if you're just like, I can't do that, like, we do have an ebook too, if you just want to like kind of read it to see if you like it. And then, my first book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, is also on Amazon.
Awesome. And what are your Instagram and other channels?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm at Run Eat Meat Repeat. On Twitter, at Michelle Hearn RD. And then the dietitiansdilemma.net is my website, and I've got more information about everything I do. But also, if you're interested in the protein project, I've got information about that on there as well.
Well, you're doing amazing work, Michelle. And everyone go follow Michelle, and please leave us a comment down below of what you thought about this video, and all about what your experiences is with kids and trying to get them to eat healthy. Thank you so much for being on my channel, and we'll see you next time, Michelle. Happy
Thank you. I
holidays.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too.